He doesn't want to.
He doesn't want to talk about it, but I want to talk about it. So he kind of has no choice. We're live on YouTube. You're going to have to talk about it.
Yeah.
So we'll just crack into it. The first thing that came up after last week's podcast was feedback on YouTube about a question. They liked the podcast, blah, blah, blah. But they had a question. So it's peeing during a big lift. This is going to come down to Ayshea for women. This woman says she trains in a gym with a lot of strong women. They'd be afraid to do a competition in case they pee themselves when they're competing. It's kind of the embarrassment side of it, I suppose, really is what it comes down to. So what's your feedback? What are your thoughts? You're going to have more on this than we will.
Okay, so I remember I did a blog post probably about 4 or 5 years ago, just around the experiences that women get when they go into, say, powerlifting and strong women, that they don't realize that may happen. Okay, and there's a few different areas, but one of the biggest things I think is peeing yourself. Over the past, I have a very kind of direct thought process on this, and it probably isn't going to be popular, but I don't really care. And it's coming from experience and anatomy and everything else. And the past year to 18 months, I think there has almost been a glorification, I think, of peeing oneself. It's been out there an awful lot. I think there's been a lot of videos on Instagram and stuff of girls literally in full flow after deadlifting, right? I personally don't think there's any need for that. And I think if somebody was coming into my gym and every time they were deadlifting, anything over a certain weight was going into full flow, I would be extremely pissed off because there is no need for it in a majority of cases, right? Aside from that, it does happen, and be prepared for the fact that once your lifts get heavier, deadlifting, and particularly, I find it with stones more so than anything else now from a personal point of view, that the heavier the deadlifts got from time to time, more so than squat or anything else, I might pee, right? There's a couple of reasons why that would happen. And normally if my bladder is too full and I haven't gone for a pee beforehand and haven't emptied my bladder. We do have a thing that we laughingly refer to any women who are still very new to strength sports as the second bladder or the hidden bladder, because you think you've got nothing left and you've had a good pee, and the next thing you come out and you lift a heavy stone and you're peeing for Ireland again. So two aspects, I suppose, of this. There are those who don't address that there is a situation, and there is those who are unaware that the situation can happen and you can actually pee yourself when you're lifting heavy. But it doesn't happen all the time. If you think it's going to put you off lifting, the one thing I can say to you is there's things you can do. Like, again, making sure that your bladder is empty before you go to the toilet. A lot of us wear a sanitary towel, or some of the girls actually go as far as an incontinent pad, just to stop the embarrassment of, if you're going to pee, that it doesn't go everywhere. And also, you don't want to be walking around in wet leggings and wet shorts for amount of time, or having to take a load of clothes with you all the time to change your clothes because you peed yourself. I want to go back to the point I made, that it does happen. It doesn't have to be all the time. It doesn't have to be excessive. And I just want to get that point across.
Can I just go back to one thing you said about the glorification of it? Do you think people think it's not pissing themselves, not working hard enough? Is that what you mean by that?
I think that's what was probably being put out there for a while. Do you know, because, if you're doing a really heavy lift and you pee everywhere, you're exerting yourself. When I pulled the 240, I didn't pee myself. But when I did a 90 kilo stone one motion, I peed myself. So do you know what I mean? And I've done a 140 stone. Yeah. So, and again, that's something that's actually more recently is the stones as they've got heavier. And I think it's because of the position that the stone is on my stomach more than anything else. What I want to flip back to is how you can control that, because it's actually not healthy if your bladder is actually that weak. And if you're deadlifting 50, 60 kilos and you're peeing, there's something most likely wrong with your plumbing. Okay, so with your bladder control. What they used to see a lot of with women who had children was a weakness in the bladder, right? And what we would talk about in the medical term would be doing pelvic floor exercises. And there would be an old school thing, I think, of encouraging women to do pelvic floor, which is actually part of your core, which people don't realize. So your pelvic floor is all linked to your core. And if your core is exercised and you're doing your pelvic floor as part of that, it should prevent a lot of peeing at an early stage rather than at a bit more control, because your bladder is more controlled. So especially if you're a person that finds if you sneeze, every time you sneeze, cough or laugh, you're peeing a bit, then I would be saying to you, look at your pelvic floor, not look at your pelvic floor, but work on your pelvic floor, right? Because you can't physically look at your pelvic floor. Yeah, and have a look. But no, to work on your pelvic floor, right? Because that is the one big thing. And I'm going to give you a story of around this. So when I first started powerlifting, there was a lady who's actually in the medical profession, and every time she would deadlift, and it wouldn't even be her max, she would pee. And I mean, she would full on piss all over the deadlift platform. And like, we were really new to it, and we were like, oh, what the hell is this crap? Because none of us were peeing at that point, and we were like, this is crazy. Is this what's going to happen? We didn't know. We just see this. Anyway, roll on this lady. She wasn't powerlifting for a year or so, and then we saw her at a powerlifting meeting. We're just chatting to her, and she was lying on the floor doing some strange core exercises, and we were chatting to her. And she was like, oh, she says, no. She said, I wasn't powerlifting for a while. She said, but I had a real issue, she said, with pissing myself every time I go to exert myself. And it wasn't even a max. It'd be like 50% upwards she'd be peeing. And like, she is a doctor. She's actually a doctor, right? And she was like, I realized my pelvic floor is rubbish. It's something I have to exercise. It's a muscle. The bladder sphincter is a muscle. So it needs to be exercised. Some people would have better bladder control and a stronger muscle, the same as the rest of us, right? With other muscles. So it was just being aware of that. And like, that was very conscious for me then, because I was going, okay, well, I've had 3 kids. I haven't peed as yet. Then I would get to a heavier deadlift and I start to realize, oh, hang on, I'm peeing a bit here. That's obviously now I'm starting to, like, the belt was very tight. If it was in a certain position, it was putting that more pressure on the abdominal wall. So it was for me going, oh, how do I work around this? Okay, continue on with pelvic floor, right? So I would make sure I was doing my pelvic floor. I'd make sure my bladder was empty. For a while, I actually wouldn't drink a huge amount of water, and I still don't during competition, because A, I don't want to feel uncomfortable. B, I don't want to pee everywhere and feel uncomfortable. And it's not that it would stop me. If I was in the middle of a lift and I'm going to pee, it's going to have to go. Like, it's going to have to pee. The lift is going with me. So skipping back to, I suppose, the one of the original questions was, should you let it put it you off? No. Should you address it as a situation of how you can lessen it from happening? Yes, I think you should. And the sense of, for a while there, where people were going, okay, it's perfectly fine to just pee everywhere all the time from 50% up, I don't think that's fine at all. If you are exerting yourself and if you happen to pee, don't panic, don't worry about it, but there's things that you can do to prevent it or to lessen it.
So don't just ignore what's happening. Don't let it embarrass you, but don't just ignore it and actually fix the problem.
Exactly. Well, look at not even fix it, because you might not be able to actually fix it, but to improve upon it. Because again, it's more, and I always try and take it away from, it's not just about lifting. If you are going through everyday life and you start to experience more and more shit. Now, if you're lifting heavy, you are going to get issues with your pelvic floor if you're not working those muscles, because you're putting a huge amount of pressure on your bladder and your abdominal wall. And I actually laugh about this because we said it before, how guys don't pee themselves, right? Like, why don't guys pee themselves? Because they're plumbed very differently to women. Guys, and I know you two, we had this conversation, but I know more frequently, I think, that guys may shite themselves a bit rather than they've never peed themselves. No guy I've ever said that. They've come close. Or
it'd be a lot more likely, definitely, to shit yourself than it would be to piss yourself.
Okay, so again, and then I kind of go, well, I'd rather piss myself than shit myself.
I think I would too, to be honest.
Might slide the deadlift up a bit.
Yeah, could get rid of competition because the smell is so bad.
You're not allowed to use baby oil. It might just work for you.
Some shite on it, yeah. But no, so like, yeah, it's be prepared. It could happen. And most likely it will happen at some point. Don't be embarrassed by it. Okay, I can imagine if you're in a commercial gym and you happen to do it, it could be embarrassing, but kind of clean up, move on, and just take those precautions and those extra measures. And like, just quickly back to it, it's a muscle. It has to be exercised. If you have had kids, there's more likelihood, but I'm seeing it, and we've seen it more in women, young women who haven't had children. So in my mind, unless you have a surgical issue, then you should be fixing that. There is less a reason for you to be peeing everywhere. Yeah,
like I've seen it in comps, like where women would pee themselves a small bit and they'd be absolutely mortified. So it obviously doesn't happen to them regularly, I would say.
Yeah.
Whereas then you would see the people who have kind of, like you said, they're just gushing everywhere.
Yeah.
And it regularly happens as well. And you're kind of there going, so in your mind, that person needs to absolutely be working on that. And
I
trying to improve on it.
absolutely, I think they should be trying to work on it, improving it. And I'm not being a dick. I probably am, but I'm trying not to be a dick and go, I've had 3 kids and I lift really heavy and I manage not to gush on every lift.
Yeah.
So if you are peeing excessively on every lift,
Yeah.
sort it out, girls, because there's something not right. You are neglecting pelvic floor. There's a huge amount of information out there on Kegels, on pelvic floor exercises. And likewise, it's going to help you for when you get older, because there are issues that can happen to women with womb prolapses. There's an awful lot of horrible shit out there that can happen. So again, taking it away from just weight training and just the minor embarrassment of peeing when you do an excessive lift is something that you need to be aware of.
And that'll be a really good blog post for you to do. Actually put some resources in there where they can find information on the
Absolutely,
exercises.
on Kegels and pelvic floor.
Yeah.
I feel like as well, most people who are experienced with strength sports, whether it be like powerlifting, strongman and strongwoman, I think everyone has seen that happen at some point, but like it's not like, you know, most experienced people have seen this happen, but they're not like, no one's gonna judge you for it. Like, it's just like the people who actually understand what the sport is are understanding that like when you're under that much pressure, like these things can actually happen. So it's like no one's ever going to ridicule you, and if somebody does ridicule you, well then they're just a fool, and just like don't listen to those kind of people.
It's like when me and you are going to have a good cry now this weekend at Giant Size. And we're seen on camera. Everyone's going to understand, aren't they?
I hope so.
I hope we don't start crying, man.
Why do boys cry? No, and I think like it depends on the environment. Like I said there, if you're in a solid gym like this and it's happened to us, no one passes any. Like
No.
I've done it here. A couple of the other girls have done it, but no one pays heed to it.
No.
We clean it up, we move on.
Just get on.
And the same in competition. Like we'll run out there, clean it up, off we go.
Yeah, just being adult about it.
Be an adult about it.
That's about
But
it.
I can,
That's a good tip.
But like I said, I can understand if you're in a commercial gym and next thing that you suddenly pee because you're doing a max deadlift. How
and it never happened before, maybe.
And never happened before. So just be prepared. It can happen. But like I said, there's things you can, like a sanitary towel or an incontinence pad, if you know you're going to go for a heavy lift. So that's a pre-warning, I suppose, to anyone who hasn't had that experience. Be prepared. For anyone who has had the experience and is unsure how to deal with it, you know, there are things you can do to stop it being as bad. But unfortunately, for the majority of us, at some point on heavy lift of some shape or form, you could be. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I think that's some good information for people right there.